Nehemiah chapter 3. Nehemiah 3 verse 1 says, Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place, building as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated, and as far as the Tower of Hananel. The men of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zakur, son of Imri, built next to them. The fish gate was rebuilt by the sons of Hasaneah. They laid its beams and put its doors and bolts and bars in place, and Meremoth, son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired the next section. Next to him, Meshullam, son of Berechiah, the son of Meshezabel, made repairs. And next to him, Zadok, son of Benaiah, also made repairs. The next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa, but their nobles would not put their shoulders to the work under their supervisors. The Jeshanah gate was repaired by Jehoiada, son of Paseah, and Meshullam, son of Besodiah. I didn't look that word up, Besodiah. They laid its beams and put its doors with their bolts and bars in place, and so on and so forth. If you look, this is 30-something verses of names. And so because I love you and want us to all have a good day, we're not going to read the rest of the names. Can we agree that we're okay to do that today? Okay, great. Let me pray. Lord, we are grateful and slightly confused that you have put this passage in Scripture. You said that every word that is in the Bible is meant for our good. It might not be written about us, but it was written to us, for us, so that we can know what you're like, know who you are and how you're at work. And Lord, so much of what we need today is a glimpse of hope that you are real, you are good, you are trustworthy, and you just might be at work in our lives individually and as a church and in our town and in our world. Lord, I pray that you would give us eyes of faith to see you, hearts of faith to trust you, ears of faith to hear and understand your word, we ask. In Jesus' name, we pray. Amen. I like to cook with my kids. It is hilariously endearing to watch them follow a recipe. They are especially passionate about smelling all of the ingredients before they go in. I don't know why, it's a thing, but they want to smell everything. Whether it's a spice or a plastic jar that hasn't been opened yet, this is what they do. Daddy, can I smell it before you put it in? Great. And so we have adjusted mealtime to become a family activity. For those of you that haven't seen the cuteness that was up here that just exited, we've got girls age 3 and Caleb age 5. Nobody really knows what they're doing in the kitchen, including Dad, but hey, we all try and figure it out together. Now, my favorite thing that I like to do with the kids, though, is cracking eggs, because it is a disaster every time, right? You can imagine how this went. Guys, we're going to crack eggs. What? Are there chickens in there? Not those kind, well, yes, those kind of eggs, but no, there's kind of, just, they're eating eggs. Eating eggs, we're going to crack them. Everybody good? Good. Okay, first one, we're going to crack it on this bowl. Wham! Like they were playing dodgeball with Chicken Little. I mean, it was obliterated. Shells were everywhere. Did I do it right, Daddy? Sure. I mean, you scrambled and cracked at the same time. So then we fished all of the shells out. We look at child number 2 and say, try it a little lighter. This one's a little more timid and barely touches the side of the bowl, gets upset that the egg doesn't break. It was a whole thing. We had to work through the emotions that you have to hit it a little bit harder. Third child has figured out how this works and executes the crack to perfection. And before I have a chance to explain what to do next, she jams her finger into the egg and starts whirling around inside the egg yolk. And I washed her hands, but I didn't wash them like scramble around in the egg yolk well, you know what I'm saying? Like I did dad wash rather than sanitize before surgery wash. And so I was a little grossed out by this experience, but nonetheless, she got it in there and pulled her hand out and then held it. And it dripped all the way in. Not a shell to be seen as that child figured out how to crack eggs. To this day, we have to try and convince her that that's not how eggs are supposed to work. Now, when I'm left to my own devices, I'm a single-handed egg cracker. Anybody with me? Like, it's just cleaner and easier. You crack it, you pull it, it all happens in one hand. It was something I wanted to learn when I was 20, and ever since then, I'm not looking back. It's a different experience when you have unskilled volunteer labor called children, right? That's a different vibe. But it's kind of cute. It's endearing. It's fun, right? That's the whole point of cooking with kids. What I want you to think about is that experience when you hear a list of names like Nehemiah 3. But whether you realize it or not on first read, it is the story of an entire cast of volunteer, unskilled workers trying to build a city wall. If you don't think God has a sense of humor, an entire group of people trying to get together to do a volunteer, unskilled worker putting together, can you imagine the committees that had to be built to do this type of work? I mean, they had to have a stone selection committee, a chisel selection committee, a committee to address grievances in other committees. Like, it was a whole process to get people mobilized to build this massive city wall. And Nehemiah, one Old Testament scholar describes it, puts this chapter together as a giant thank you note to make sure that every person that put hand to chisel, that lifted a stone onto the wall, was appropriately thanked for their work. Now, that's great, but I want you to imagine what it was like on the day of the build. Imagine the hilariousness and the awkwardness of this ragtag group of people coming together. I mean, the passage begins by describing Eliashib, the high priest. The high priest was a unique guy in ancient Near Eastern culture, especially to the tribe and the nation of Israel. He was the highest-ranking religious figure, the pope of that day, and his job was to represent in his physical person the entire country and nation of Israel. He wore a breastplate with 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel, and he would enter into the temple and go into a room that only he was allowed to go into one day a year, every year, to engage God on the Day of Atonement. It was called Yom Kippur. This was a whole process that this guy would go through. Needless to say, you recognized him when he was out and about. But today, Eliashib is not in the temple. He's not in the Holy of Holies. He's not dressed to impress. He's out working on the wall. You know, when the men of Jericho who came next, that were supposedly working next to him, they had an 18-mile hike up a mountain to get to Jerusalem. They smelled bad. They were a rough and tumble kind of group. And then the guy next to him was named Zakur. And you know, they looked at each other and were kind of staring. Is that the high priest? Is he wearing dad shorts and an old t-shirt? What are we supposed to talk about today? Like, he's going to ruin the vibe. We were going to have fun. Now I don't know how to joke. Like, you know that all of those awkward social dynamics, you want to know how to quickly take the fun out. Be the guy who says, I'm the high priest, and I'm here to watch you work. And we're going to work alongside together. It was awkward. It was uncomfortable. But I also imagine these guys coming from Jericho up the mountains occur. They're looking at the high priest, and then at some point they have to talk to each other, right? It takes a minute to build a wall, and they're from Jericho. Now, if Zakur has any sense of humor in his bones, he is going to make the reference that in the Bible, Jericho has famous walls, but they don't stay up. They fall down. The whole point of the story of Jericho in the early chapters of the Bible is that the walls of the city crumble in a miraculous intervention from God. So you know he has to make the point. Hey, quick question. On a scale of 1 to 7 trips around, how secure are you in your construction skills, right? He's making hey, I'm down with you guys being here. Super glad you're here. But if anybody starts blowing trumpets, we're all going to take a quick lunch. Can we agree? Like, you just imagine the jokes that would have been passed around in this ragtag group. Nobody quite knows what they're doing. You look at the next section in verse 3, the Hassaneah boys are cranking away because family-run businesses never have any conflict, never get into any arguments. All of the brothers work well together and are calm and perfectly aligned in how they function. You can imagine how peaceful that section of the wall build would have gone. Next to them in verse 4 is Meshullam, who finished his work by himself so fast, his name comes up at the end of the story doing another section of the wall by himself. There are people in this room that are the Meshullahs of the world, right? I'm looking at you, Steve, Blair. I'm looking over at Barry, Bill Timberman, just like handy guys that know what they're doing on construction projects. And then you have me going, who is Philip and what does he have to do with the screw that I'm holding? Why is his head so important? Like, I don't understand what is going on with construction projects. But you guys just quietly, quickly, diligently, and without much fuss or fanfare, get work done. Right? You can see these volunteers starting to pop off the page. My personal favorite is Uzziel the goldsmith and Hananiah the perfume maker. They were, in other words, not stonemasons, okay? They worked with gold, or they made pretty smelling perfumes, and they were put in charge, the text says, of the broad wall. Now, if you know what the broad wall was, that was the least damaged part of the walls of Jerusalem. Nehemiah was like, great, glad you're here. You're not in charge of anything structural whatsoever. Just clean it. Can you do that? But I would imagine them knowing that they had the biggest section, so they were measuring by the foot. They were going around, oh, how much did you build? Just one gate? We did the whole wall, friends. We are professionals. You know they were having fun with being the least skilled laborers in the group. Verse 9 to 19 describes all of the local politicians coming together, whether they were mayors or city councilmen, rulers, different sorts of governors of these districts came together and all lifting with one effort, one project, one united front. You can imagine how unique it was to see all of those leaders agreeing on what to do at one point in time. But I know that the most pot-stirring thing that happened was one of the councilmen, his name was Shallum, he showed up with all of his daughters. Now this is ancient Near Eastern culture. Construction is a dude's job. We don't have ladies here. This is a super borderline patriarchal society, and yet Shallum comes up and says, God's people are going to show up to build this wall, and my daughters are part of this project. It was not just progressive. They had skills. They started to build, right? All of my powerful ladies, right? Thank you very much. They got it done. They were able to quickly turn the schemes and the sneers into the respect that they commanded. I imagine them saying, I can hold a chisel just like Jael from the book of Judges. If you don't know what that means, read it. It's an impressive story in Judges chapter 5. But God is powerful. And God's people are uniquely called, even though they're not necessarily skilled, even though they're not necessarily professionals. It's just this group of people. Nehemiah is going out of his way to say, nobody was a construction foreman. Nobody was a hired stone mason, and yet everybody was building. My question is why? I mean, we can play and have fun and think about all of the quirky dynamics because these were real people with real personalities and real senses of humor and real conflicts and points of interest, and they all got dehydrated and needed water. I mean, they were real people, but why is this story here? Why is Nehemiah highlighting all of these different unique individuals, none of them seemingly knowing what they're doing, coming together to build a wall? It's the same reason that I cook with my kids. It's not about the food. I mean, in fact, usually when I cook with my kids, the food doesn't taste as good because you don't time it well. There's shells in the eggs. I mean, it's a whole thing. But the point of cooking with kids is because it informs and forms the bond with my kids. It's entirely about the people, not about the product. The whole point of Nehemiah is that the people are the purpose, not the construction project itself. In other words, the entire book of Nehemiah ain't about the walls. It's very easy to make it seem like it's about stone on top of stone and structural integrity, but as you read, you start to realize that how Nehemiah tells this story is actually a celebration that the purpose of rebuilding the walls is the way that God is gathering a unique group of people that do not make sense together, and yet they're united with a common purpose and a common goal and a common objective, and all of a sudden, we're recapturing the identity that we lost some 100 years ago when the nation was scattered and sent into exile. It's not about the walls. The people are the purpose. If you think I'm reading too much into it, look at verse 1. We start with the story of a spiritual leader building a physical wall. And at the end of them building the sheep gate, it says they dedicated this portion of the wall. The word dedicated there is the word for set apart as holy. It's what they would use to describe the instruments in a temple. These were things that were supposed to be religious in nature. They were used for worship. They were used for special service to God. They were kept clean in order to be used in those ways. You have candles and various serving dishes that would be described as sanctified, as set apart as holy. And yet they describe the process of building a wall, a sanctifying work. because as they built the wall, God was sanctifying the people. See, the whole point of Nehemiah, we talked about it from chapter 1 and chapter 2, professionals can build great big nice walls, but it's only transformed people that can introduce God to a watching world. We can build great big structures. We can put together beautiful campuses. We could have gotten the walls of Jericho built probably faster and better if we hired crews to do the work, but the people would have remained unchanged. They would not have been united in the work. There would have been the same sort of feeling as dad cooking by himself and serving a meal to kids. It could have worked, but how much more does it work when the kids themselves participate in the process? It's transformative. For God, the people are always the point. For God, the transformation of people is always the point. Now, the thing about transformation, we just kind of name some obvious dynamics. If you and I are going to change, if we're going to change for the better, if we're going to experience this powerful communal celebration of God at work in our lives, it requires us to interact with someone different than us. You have never stayed or encountered someone that was exactly like you and walked away transformed. The whole point of transformation is you have to see a difference before you become different. Whether that's a religious thing or just like a social thing. Transformation requires encountering and interacting and getting to know and befriending people who are different from us. Of course, that's how that works. And I'm not talking about any sort of type of difference. I'm just talking difference in general, whether it's age or race or just your favorite football team, whatever it is, you got to encounter someone different from you in order to be transformed. You have to see it before you become it. In other words, when my sweet little baby girl sticks her finger in the eggs and I have to wait patiently, it's not just an annoyance that I have to deal with as a parent. It's an invitation to let my daughter influence me, to let the slowed pace change the scorecard from taste to connection, from efficiency to personal transformation and communal building. I think about what it will be like to cook dinner when they're all 30 and I'm like 130. And we can, like, what will that be like when we have had years upon years upon years of cooking together? And then can I be more patient when I'm rushed for time and I'm trying to get out the door and it's breakfast and we've already changed our mind 6 times about what we want? It's an invitation to pause. Now, we can't romanticize this. It's cute when we're talking about kids. It's cute when we're doing a metaphor of kids cooking, right? And that's my whole point. I want to try and win you over to the vibe first. But there's an author by the name of John Ortberg, and he said the actual experience of community across difference is not as romantic as we would want it to be. He's actually channeling a guy in the 1930s by the name of Dietrich Bonhoeffer who similarly said, we as human beings have an ideal of community. We romanticize the way that we want to be engaged with our friends and our loved ones and our romantic partners, but the boots on the ground experience is much more prickly. John Ortberg says, human beings at their core are porcupines trying to hug other porcupines for warmth. I leave you with that image. Porcupines trying to hug other porcupines. What happens if you are a porcupine and you're cold? You need something to warm you up, but you got this problem. You are a prickly person, and so am I. And those pricklies can be character faults. They can be a gruff personality. They could be past wounds and traumas that are triggering and we haven't worked through how to process well. There's all sorts of ways that my prickles can make it hard to hug me, and yet I need hugs. And the same is true for you. And here we are with a whole bunch of people that we named as volunteers from different groups and different walks of life and different experiences and different jobs, and somehow they managed to put hand to wall together. If you want to see what a miracle looks like, these footnotes describe a community that should not be able to function, and yet they built a wall. What happens when the people around you start to bother you? When the people around me start to disrupt my way of life that I want? Nehemiah 3 would say, pause. What if it's about the people, not the product? what if? The point is that this is an invitation to be transformed in your own soul, or perhaps an invitation to transform others. If I can give you one more metaphor, every single person in this room is going to have somebody, the unique experience of having somebody explore the yolk in the egg that you have. And you're going to do the same thing for somebody else. You will be that person to someone else in this room. And somebody else in this room will be that person for you. We can all collectively agree now, okay? It's not just one. It's everybody is going to do it. But the people are the point, despite their prickliness. So what do we do with this weird tension where, if we're honest, all of those different types of people would be prickly, and yet Nehemiah is celebrating them coming together? What do we do? Let's keep exploring the passage. In verse 5, there's a group of people that decide they don't want to be prickled. They have seen how this movie unfolds. They have their bingo card ready, and building a wall with a whole bunch of volunteers is not what they signed up to do. You can read it in verse 5. It says, the next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa, the regular folk of Tekoa, the everyday citizens of Tekoa, but their nobles would not put their shoulders to the work under their supervisors. That is biblical juke for y'all didn't want to be submitted to somebody who had different plans than you did about how the project was going to unfold. I love that. They didn't want to put their shoulder to the work. They said, if I dig into this, if I sink my hands into the people I have to work with, into the work I have to do, it's going to be uncomfortable and prickly, and I would prefer not to lean my weight into that circumstance. We don't actually know what the deal was. Old Testament scholars speculate. Some of them say that the Hebrew here is just vague enough that it's a way of saying they didn't like Nehemiah, the guy who was in charge, and they didn't like that he had the blessing of the oppressive empire to build the walls, and so they were making a statement politically by not participating. Some of them say that they just flat out disagreed with how the project was unfolding. They didn't like the design. They didn't like the people who were working. They didn't like who their co-laborers had to be. They didn't think that they should be involved. And so they were going to vote by protest to not certify this particular construction endeavor. Some scholars would say the word really is about their sense of superiority, their sense of pride. They were the rulers of Tekoa. They knew how this was supposed to go. And they did not want to follow a recipe that was not theirs. Maybe, just maybe, they were tired, exhausted. I mean, most scholars would say that this particular city didn't have a massive exile of people 70 years ago, so they have been living in this area for decades, doing their part, and maybe they're just telling themselves, I've already done this. I've already done everything I know how to do. I got nothing else to offer. It's someone else's turn. And so for whatever reason, the rulers of this particular community say, everybody else can do the work. We're out. And the ironic part of this is we can compare those rulers, those leaders with Nehemiah. Scroll through the 33 verses of this chapter. Do you see where Nehemiah is mentioned? He's not. Who's in charge? Nehemiah. Who's the one who got approval from all of the different civic leaders who got funding, who got resources, who got everybody aligned and arranged? Whose plan is being implemented? Nehemiah. If anybody's a standard bearer and needs their plaque on a wall somewhere, it's Nehemiah. And in ancient Near Eastern context, this is actually where the sense of civic pride would bolster, I did this. I, as the representative of the king, I, as the cupbearer, got all of this accomplished, because he's got to go back and justify being gone from his job for a year. But he doesn't even mention his name, even though he's the one who is writing it all down. Why? Because Nehemiah gets it. It's always been about the people. And if it's about the people, it's not about my pride or my preference. Part of the prickliness is that we get into these preferences and pride points that make it hard. There are all sorts of prickles, but the particular ones that jump out in Nehemiah 3 are there, right? My kids do this too. They want to cook. They want to cook with daddy. But daddy has the audacity to tell them they have to follow a recipe that they did not invent, and it has ingredients that they do not like, and it requires minimal amounts of salt, even though salt is really fun to pour into a recipe. They want to do their own thing. And if they could communicate with SAT words, they would say, Dad, I disagree with your assessment of this particular culinary recipe. I want to put together my own plan for how this works, and so I refuse to participate. What it actually looks like is when Daddy says no 3 times in a row, we melt down on the kitchen floor. Why? Because it was supposed to be fun, and following a recipe isn't fun anymore. It was supposed to be joyous, and this isn't fun and joyous anymore. I'm having to follow instructions that I don't particularly like. See, here's the thing. In the book of Nehemiah, everybody's cheering for the walls. Everybody's cheering for renewal. We're cheering for restoration. Nobody in this room says we are anti-restoration, right? I mean, that's just silly. Nobody is anti-renewing their sense of purpose and life. Nobody is anti-new life. And yet, what this paints is a picture of what it looks like to be so convinced of the purpose that unites people that we're willing to give up our pride and our preference in order to see that purpose accomplished. That is very different. Because baked into that is the death of a dream, the death of an ideal, the death of something that was in Nehemiah's mind that most definitely did not come to fruition the way that he envisioned it. You think that every single volunteer executed exactly how this dude wrote it down? Not a chance. They had a goldsmith working on walls. This did not come out in a perfect, ideal sense. And yet, Nehemiah celebrates the work of this ragtag group of people because it's about their transformation, not the perfection of the product. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says, if we're so idealistic about what community should be, we will never experience the reality of what community actually is. It will always be porcupines. We can learn how to hug. We can work around and get used to and heal and work through some of those things, but it's always going to be a prickly experience. You and I will always have those challenges. And so we think about how our community is going to be flowing over the next couple of months. I was just praying and pondering, what does this look like for us? And so if you're a guest with us, this is going to feel like insider baseball for about 3 minutes, but hang, right? We have celebrated this. We have talked about this. He didn't know I was going to bring this up because he gets embarrassed about this kind of stuff, but Larry's retiring. And we're going to celebrate that because he has served this church faithfully for decades. And there have been unique things that Kathy and Larry have done in leadership in our church that no other human being on God's green earth could have done. We're so grateful. And we're going to celebrate that. And at the end of August, we're going to have a party that is embarrassingly congratulatory for all of the ways that Larry has served faithfully. And then September is going to come. And everybody's question is, what does that look like for us? And if we have an idealistic version of how our community needs to function, if we all have individual plans of what needs to happen next, and we don't have a clear sense of purpose of what we're doing together as a group, then we're all going to start getting prickly with each other. Because our dreams cannot all come to fruition. They're different. Right? It's as silly as when you see kids running around and doing wind sprints after worship. Have you seen this? Stick around a little bit, and you'll start to see them doing laps, and it's chaos, and somebody has to be the monster, and the other ones have to chase them, and what can happen in that dynamic is we can start to disagree with the values underneath it. Some of us, hey, that's a safety hazard. Like, I got a walker. We need to be careful. Is that a good value? Yes. Do we need to protect? Yes. Some of us can get defensive and say, oh, so if you are worried about your stability, then you obviously hate children and don't want them around. Is that true? No. But can we get in each other's way and get prickly in those moments? What's the only thing that could unlock such different opinions and viewpoints on the same behavior? A clear sense of what we're doing together as a group. There's an Old Testament scholar, his name is Chris Wright, and he said the wild thing about community, the wild thing about church, is that if you aim for community, you miss it. The point of the church being created is it was on the other side of mission, the other side of purpose. It's the thing that is the result of a shared purpose, not the thing that we get together to decide what our purpose should be. Community is the result of purpose, not the creator of it. Why? He has a really clever way that he describes it. He said, God's church doesn't have a mission so much as God's mission has a church. I'll say it again because I messed it up. God's church, that's us, doesn't have a mission. We don't have our own individual purpose so much as God's mission, his purpose in the world, what he is doing, creates a church. The story of Nehemiah starts with God wanting to rebuild the walls of the city that would demarcate his people to a watching world. The walls were the way that they would introduce who he was to people who do not know him. He was interested in making this happen, and so he begins the work. And he motivates Nehemiah, and then he motivates King Artaxerxes, and then they get together, and all of a sudden his favor starts to come around, and it's not quite the favor that we thought. And then we get into this group of people, and it is a ragtag volunteer crew. Why? Because as these volunteers start to put the wall together, they start to look around and go, is this working? I can't believe, are the walls, it's been 100 years, it's been 100 years. I never would have dreamed that the walls would have come up. I didn't think new life was possible. Maybe God is actually doing, and you don't even know, I don't even know what I'm doing. Is God doing something? Yeah. If we just hire a crew and pay a bill, it's easy to explain. But God likes to do stuff that doesn't make sense. That makes it hard to explain in any other way other than he's real and he's at work. That means for you and me, as we have been praying for the last 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years for IRPC to experience a season of renewal, a season of new life, as we have been praying and dreaming about what it would look like to not just be the statistics of decline, but to buck the trend and to see God blow fresh life into our community, that means that it is not going to be like any one of us have dreamed about, pastor included. None of our idealistic versions of the future are going to come to fruition because none of us can predict the future. There's going to be prickles and people that have yet to come into the room that are going to influence how the future goes. And the invitation is to embrace it because God's purpose is moving forward, not mine. God's dream is coming to fruition, not mine. And I can dare to believe that his dreams might be better than mine. But that's, hard to feel in the moment. Nehemiah 3 is an invitation for all of us to say, when am I Nehemiah, quiet and confident that God is doing work? And when am I most like these rulers of Tekoa, where I think I know what should be going on, and so because it's not happening the way that I want, I'm going to hold back. I'm grieving the death of a dream, of an ideal. This is more than just how it affects church. How many of us need to experience that with the families that God has placed you in? How many of us need to go through that emotionally with the marriages or the lack of marriages that God has placed you in? How many of us need to grieve and then realize that God has a dream for you that just might be different than the dream that you and I have for me and you? It's hard. But the invitation here is to see that it's possible, and it might be better. And the only thing that could kill it, the only thing that would be grievous, the only thing that would be sad is to be the rulers of Tekoa that cross their arms and say, I'm not waiting around to see how the journey unfolds. I imagine in the moment they felt perfectly justified and they were going to win the moment, right? I mean, you just know. I'm not going to follow Nehemiah. And we read it some 1,000 years later and think, well, that's sad. These little boogers look like jerks. They missed out on all the fun. They registered their protest and didn't get to see and be a part of God at work. How sad. God's church doesn't have a mission. God's mission has a church. Let me land here because what I'm describing is really hard. It's emotional. If I just say the whole point of wrapping our heads around a purpose and a mission and a dream that's bigger than ours and different than ours is just buck up and get over it. Huh? What? Like that's emotionally painful. And no payout on the other side. Why would anybody do that? Being a Christian is miserable. Yay! Like nobody would want, that's just not how the life of faith is supposed to feel like. But here's the thing. We have to go through the hard part so that the good part is good news. The good news doesn't make the hard part easier. It just gives you hope at the end of the tunnel. You pray the psalm, even though I walk through the darkest valley, the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for your rod and your staff comfort me. I want no valleys. I want no darkness. I want no hardship or difficulties. I want comfort and stability. But God seems to have a different point for my life and for our church. The good news of this passage comes from verse 1. because it wasn't just any random gate that they designate as anointed, that they set apart, that they christen, as it were. It was the sheep gate. If you know anything about how ancient Israel worked, what were sheep for? Sacrifice, worship. The whole point of the animal sacrificial system was that you would bring in animals through a gate called the sheep gate. And the animals would become a substitute. They would be a way to visually represent the life and the innocence that God designed all of us to have. A perfect world of communion with God with no shame or guilt or pain or trauma. A perfect connection and purity in our relationship with each other. A perfect connection and purity in our relationship with our own souls and our own bodies. A perfect relationship and purity with the world itself. Innocence. And then they would kill and eat as a way of showing that when we resist God, when we reject him, when we try to introduce our own definitions of right, wrong, and best, when we try to be God in our lives, we introduce death. We introduce selfishness. We introduce pride. We introduce this thing called sin, which is not just breaking arbitrary rules. It's trying to be God. The men of Tekoa wanted to be in charge, and they push. Nehemiah was willing to submit to a process he can't control, and he celebrated. Baked into the heart of each of us is the need to see that sin, to see that selfishness, to see that pride in your own soul. It's not always there. It's a war. There's moments of beauty, and there's moments where we need a substitutionary sacrifice. And the sheep, over time, trained God's people to see that. And then eventually, there was this guy who came and he said, I am the true and better and final Lamb of God. And I'm not just here for symbolism. In my death, I will actually absorb the sin. I will take the poison out of your soul. I will take the pride away from you. I will be treated like every sinner deserves. I will accept the consequences and the disaster and the pain of death itself, and not just physical death, but cosmic death. He will be separated from God himself. He will be the final lamb to end all animal sacrifices. His name was Jesus. It wasn't just a random human. It was God in human flesh. It was God taking on human form. It was God deciding to become the lamb. No wonder he said, I'm the gate. If you read the book of John, it's a really random metaphor. What he's saying is, anybody can come. Everybody can come. I want anybody to be in God's city. I want to give you this sense of delight and love and purpose that nothing else can, but the only way to come is through Jesus. Anybody can come. And yet, if what's true is that there's something in us that has to be healed, something in us that has to be forgiven, something in us that has to be redeemed, something in us that has to be, cleansed, we need something that actually does that cleaning work. And Jesus is the one that absorbs the dirt to give us cleanliness. They anoint the sheep gate because they want to make very clear that the core of their faith is not in their ability to build the walls well. The hope of the community is not in their ability to unite well and to stop being prickly. The hope of our faith is that there is a gate of forgiveness, a gate of where you can transfer and trade every wound that was done to you and every wound that you have inflicted, every porcupine prick that you have experienced, and every one that you have dished out can be traded to the God who created you. He is willing to absorb it all and hug you with the tightest porcupine hug you could ever imagine. He alone has no prickles, and yet he allowed his hands to be pierced. Can I give you like 7 metaphors for this? I want you to get it. Do you see what's going on here? The whole point of the sacrificial system was that lambs would be let in, but it just took more and more and more lambs. It never really did anything to change human hearts, but Jesus was the lamb who was led out of the city. And once he was crucified on the hill outside of the walls of Jerusalem that are being rebuilt right now, when he died, the sacrificial system was canceled. It was fulfilled. Its purpose was over because it was all there to prepare us to understand that it's been God's dream to heal, to forgive, to redeem, and to restore his people. And the only way that happens is if something can absorb every porcupine and then take those from you and give you clean and give you healed and give you fresh new life. The goal of mission is not to be a kid that figures out how to cook for dad. The goal of Christian faith is not to figure out how to live, to keep God happy. So much of our church world is designed to give us our religious practices and our religious goods and services and all the things we're supposed to do to be good religious people. And that's functionally, here's the recipe, go cook it, and I'll let you know if you did it right. The goal of Christianity, the goal of Nehemiah 3 is cooking with dad or mom, whatever metaphor. Cooking with parents, way more fun. Because it's their job to make sure it comes out right. It's your job to enjoy the ride along the way. It's their job to figure out how to take the salt out that you dump too much in. It's your job to enjoy the relationship along the way. What if the life of faith was more like cooking with dad? What if the invitation of Nehemiah 3 was to realize that everyone in the room gets to be invited and we get to be a family together? There will be a day, I know, that my kids will stop wanting to cook with me. It'll be a sad day. And there was a day when the people of Israel stopped wanting to be with their God. That was the whole reason the walls fell in the first place. My hope for us as a church is that we will remember this metaphor and that we will remember this invitation. The recipe, the dream for your life and for this church is better than what we could come up with in this moment. I have no idea what our future will be like. I have dreams. I know you do too. But a Nehemiah 3 passage says, look at a group of people that don't make sense together, that are beautiful despite being quirky, that are connected despite not having a whole lot in common, and together they build something more beautiful than any one of them could have built together. That's your life. That's our church. That's our families. That's our community. That's the calling. God's going to cook. He wants you to come with him. You ready?